This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right. Late start this morning. Was kind of hoping to start recording earlier than I did, but well, then life started kicking in. And you all know how that goes. So I am now literally just sitting down to start this thing, and God, are my notes a jumbled mess right now. It's going to be one of those podcasts. I can already tell. I'm not going to spend too long on the intros here, but I do want to mention for Monday's show, since we typically do the Retro Raw, the Retro NXT, and the SmackDown report, I may or may not be able to get the SmackDown for Monday. Kind of all depends on how my weekend schedule goes. It's going to be a pretty hectic couple days for me this weekend, so I don't know how it's going to work out. I mean, I'm pretty booked from pretty much all of Saturday through the rest of Sunday afternoon, and I don't know how much downtime I'm going to have between then, at least to try to sit down and watch the entire show. Maybe I'll check out a few clips on YouTube and try to gloss over a few things for the Monday show, but don't expect much. I'll try to fit it in where I can. If you don't see a SmackDown segment for Monday, it's the holiday season. I'm busy gigging. It's that time of the year where all the crap hits the fan at a given time. So I try to make do with what I can. But as always, thanks to everybody that tunes into the podcast weekly. We are here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays. Today's show, we'll be doing the Classic Territory reviews, which is always a fun time. Make sure y'all subscribe, comment, like the show, all the usual plugs we do. As I scroll down the page here to try to find my NWA notes. Like I said, I'm a little scatterbrained this morning. Did not do a good job pre-planning for this one. Here it is. So on this week's edition of Crockett TV, we are on special location. We are not at the Atlanta studios. We are in Miami Beach, Florida, at the Miami Beach Convention Center. Because, you know, where else would you be in the middle of winter season than smack dab right in the middle of beach country? I guess when we're talking about Florida, it's kind of summer all year round, right? I don't really think Florida has seasons per se. But it's always nice getting out of the TBS studios and going out to broadcast shows from different venues. Obviously, some places hit home better than others. You know, it's one thing for them to run shows in places like Charlotte or Greensboro, like the real mid-Atlantic homeland. But, you know, since Crockett's been trying to branch out to other markets and try to expand the product nationally, you know, sometimes you would get these rather obscure locations they would wind up doing live events from. Not to necessarily say Miami Beach was an obscure location to host wrestling. You know, it's been a hotbed market for years. Probably not the first place I would have expected Crockett to run a special on-location event from. I mean, for one, the Miami Convention Center seats what? Something like 5,000 people? I mean, from the video feed, looked like a pretty packed house. But you just think, was that really the first location you would have settled on if you were going to run a venue in Florida? I don't know. I'd have thought maybe Tampa, Orlando. I don't know why. Miami Beach would not have been my first inclination. I mean, crowd was a little hit and miss throughout the program. It did not have the Charlotte Greensboro level of electricity with the crowd pops. But it's cool how they did this. You know, they dive right into the Larry Zbyszko-Barry Windham match. Yes, it was for the coveted Western States Heritage Championship. The regional belt that we've heard referenced on TV more times than we've actually seen it defended. What was really cool, though, was having Jim Ross on commentary to call the action this week with Tony. You know, we talked about how he did such a brilliant job at Starrcade. Having, back to do color with Tony was a nice surprise this week. And they're slowly warming this up to when JR would kind of jump on board as a full-time play-by-play guy with WCW. So, well, I guess I should just break the bad news now. I had more technical glitching on my end, courtesy of the cock. So about 3 minutes into the match, the video feed skipped forward like 8 segments. And, I even tried to do the thing where I scroll back to the next infomercial and then backtrack on the timeline to get back to where I was. I mean, this time I couldn't even get the damn thing to work properly in the timeline. So, after I finagled with that for about 5 minutes, I just said, fuck it. I only have so many hours in the day. I'm just going to go find a website real quick, read the results, and then just kind of move on to where the show actually started working for me. Because, again, I don't have time to be messing with Peacock's shitty service. And for $10 a month, I pretty much get the quality I expect with these dumb fuckers. And I would like to know, too, for the record, does anybody else have these issues when they try to watch stuff on Peacock? Where you're like streaming something and then for absolutely no reason, it'll just jump ahead in the timeline like 5 minutes? Am I the only one that happens to? I can't imagine that's something that only happens on my end. I do not buy it. Now, apparently the match went to a 20-minute time limit draw, which is unfortunate too, because, judging by the reviews I read from various reporters, looks like the match was pretty good. Even though I think we're pretty much all in agreement that the Western States Heritage title is the most feckless mid-card title in the history of Crockett Promotions. More so than the Junior Heavyweight and or Alabama Junior title. So, it was a very ill-fated way to start the recap this week. But like I said, I tried for about 5 minutes to get that thing back in sync. Finally, I just said, I'm done trying. It's happened so often at this point, I can just take the hit and shave off a few minutes of review time. Knowing how easily I get burnt out with these long shows anyway, it might not hurt. So the actual first match I watched this week was the Warlord and the Barbarian versus Jack Towers and Rob Idol. Still not officially recognized as the Powers of Pain quite yet. But the announcers are already doing the comparison to Hawk and Animal. So, anyone capable of rubbing 2 brain cells together can kind of figure out what the long-term plan was there. They basically just hit a fuck ton of power moves on the job guys until Barbarian came down off the top rope with an elbow. It is amazing to see visuals of the Barbarian on this television show right now, where he's visibly smaller than his own tag team partner. I forgot just how huge the Warlord was, dude. Like, the camera shots didn't do it justice. I can only imagine what it must have been like standing next to that guy in person. But that was just a big guy squash. The promo afterwards with Paul Jones. God, this was hilarious. If anything, because he's taking credit for putting the Powers of Pain together as a tag team, saying that it took him 1.5 years to see this vision through, but it was all part of the plan. I was like, it took you 1 year to pair the Warlord and the Barbarian together? How many different personnel changes of the Paul Jones Army have we gone through in the last 6 months? Now you're telling me you had a 12-month plan to figure out how to put the two strongest meatheads together in a tag team? I'm starting to think you were a terrible pre-planner. What was the word Ivan used here to describe him? Ingenious. Not the term I would have used. It was definitely ungenius. Oh, and by the way, Paul promised us big things for the Warlord and the Barbarian in 1988. Indeed. Just wait till that 88 Bash Tour, brother. So, coming back, we had David Crockett standing with Ron Garvin for an interview. Obviously no backdrop or anything here except the visual of the wrestlers in the background preparing for the next match, which was kind of cool. I like that. And this is how David begins his question. Folks, the man that is no longer the World Heavyweight Champion, but people still call him champ anyway, Ron Garvin. How in the hell did Ronnie not punt this idiot in the balls? Way to undercut the guy. Nimrod. So it's a pretty generic babyface promo from Ronnie. You know, he copied a lot of what he said last week when it came to training and working extra hard to climb back up the mountain. He talked about the bunkhouse stampede, explained that it is a tough, gruesome environment to be in. But Ronnie's going to be in the thick of it, fighting for the money and proving to himself that he can outlast and beat 25 other guys. I did like this reference, too, talking about the big men that compete in bunkhouse matches. The only two big guys he could come up with off the top of his head were the Barbarian and the Mighty Wilbur. Well, to be fair, that is a lot of man. In the case of Wilbur, probably about 3 grown men. And then pitching back to the ring, we had Dr. Death versus Jerry Gray, which was relatively uneventful. Steve worked the arm, did a few power moves to Jerry, and then finished him off with the Oklahoma Stampede. And then he did his best Tony Khan impersonation during the next promo, where he talked about how great everything is, saying that Miami's a great place to be in, with great fans. He said that Barry Windham's a great wrestler, with a great future, but Williams beat him clean at Starrcade, which is a great pay-per-view. Everything's great. And then he said the Bunkhouse Stampede is coming up, and it's going to be great. The power of positivity movement, living vicariously through Dr. Death Steve Williams. He had an awesome closing line here, too, where he just went, "Message to everyone in the Bunkhouse Stampede. When the bell rings, we're not friends anymore." Good to know this was back when pride and competition was more important than maintaining dorky friendships with your coworkers. Right, Bucks? Right, Kenny? Right. Up next, we had Sting versus Bob Cook. I think during my glitchy escapade earlier, I missed a Sting promo, which actually kind of pisses me off more than missing the entirety of that Barry Windham Larry Zbyszko match. Not that this didn't come without its share of highlights, though. If there's anything that'll always put a smile on my face, even when I'm in a bad mood, it's NWA job guys going into business for themselves with the top stars and thinking they'll get away with it. There's a spot in this match where Cook tries to pick the leg of Sting, And while he's got the standing hook, Bob tries to bitch slap Sting across the face as hard as humanly possible. You will never guess. This did not get over with Sting. He proceeded to punch Bob Cook directly in the face, sending him bumbling out to the concrete with a wondrous thud. At which point, Stinger continued to beat the crap out of the guy until hitting him with a splash in the corner, following it with a scorpion for the submission. The only thing I will say, this guy is incredibly lucky Sting was greener than goose shit here. Had he tried that same spot with, say, a Tully Blanchard or a Larry Zbyszko, that man would have been deceased. I think Sting was too nice here. He should have pulled a Rick Rude and bloodied the guy up for the whole world to see. That would have been phenomenal. So then we come back for a Road Warriors promo. And they're here to basically kill Paul Jones's promo from earlier. You know, the claim that the Warlord and the Barbarian are the two strongest men in the world when, you know, the proof is standing right in front of us here. Since day one, the Legion of Doom have proven to be the biggest, baddest, and strongest team. And all Paul Jones is trying to do is lie to the people. We know who the real toughest team in professional wrestling is. And Hawk and Animal will continue to destroy everybody in their path to prove it. You know, pretty simple stuff. You know, they're already diving in headfirst to try to ramp up the Haas fight between these two powerhouse teams. I mean, as a build, they're going about it the right way. But, boy, was that payoff ever unsatisfying. We also had Precious Paul claiming that the Road Warriors are going to go through 28 other men in the Bunkhouse Stampede to prove their dominance. And this is where I noted to myself, we are now 3 weeks into the Bunkhouse build. Not a single fucking person on this show can get it straight. How many men are competing in this battle royal? We've heard numbers ranging from 20 to 25 to 30, 35. And numbers just keep seeming to grow from there. Seriously, was it that hard? Just say 30 people. Keep it simple. That way the people actually remember it. Speaking of people who can't get shit straight, we pitch back to the ring for a Jim Cronette promo. Is the graphic clearly misread? Because, you know, I mean, the company's already going to hell in a handbasket pretty quickly, so why not? Let's just have a bunch of production gaffes to expedite the downfall. And of course it gets better, because not only do they mistype Cornette's name, but they completely fuck up the actual graphic for the match. He introduces Stan Lane for singles action with Kendall Windham, and the graphic clearly reads Midnight Express versus Kendall Windham. So I had no idea what was going on here. But somebody clearly blew a call. Apparently they did not catch the memo that Beautiful Bobby was also working solo later on. They had all kinds of technical bugs here. Meanwhile, Cornette sounded like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world other than Miami Beach. His introduction for Stan fell flatter than a plate full of piss. Like, he introduces Stan to the crowd, trying to pump him up. Nobody reacted. Not even a heavy rain of boos. It was just wet fart reaction. Now, we did get a great camera shot in this segment. I don't know if this was done on purpose or if it was just hapless coincidence. Right during Corny's tirade where he's running down all the toothless Miami fans, you know, saying most of them look like the product of nuclear waste fallout, who should they put the camera on but a relatively pretty-looking brunette way up in the nosebleed section? I can confirm one thing. I had about 5 seconds to view this woman on camera. The first thing that did not come to mind was nuclear waste. She was very pretty. Yeah, the match was all right for what it was. Sweet Stan's pretty fluid with what he does in the ring, but God, Kendall's only going to give him so much to work with. Visually, it looked like a pro wrestler beating up the local paper boy. But they end up having Wyndham get a bunch of hope spots on Lane early on. And they do the deal where he comes back off a crossbody attack. He gets a near fall, but Stan powers out, which sends Windle out to the floor, or Wyndham. So while the ref's holding Stan back so he can initiate the 10 count, that allows for Corny to whack Kendall in the back with a tennis racket, which forces a count out. So Stan wins. Kind of a basic heat angle to draw sympathy on Kendall, but really nothing more than that. Again, no explanation of where Bobby was here, aside from maybe preparing for his match later on. Big Bubba was out there, but he was pretty stationary most of the time. Almost forgot he was there. Yeah, we're about to go through a real weird couple of months with the Midnights. I'm just sort of recalling this as I'm watching it again, but as we move into January of '88, I remember there being a period right before the Fantastics came in. Bobby and Stan really didn't have a whole lot going on. Not a lot of competition to work with. I think they just wound up wrestling a bunch of singles matches for like a 2 or 3 month stretch. But they're still being recognized as the U.S. Tag Team Champions. They barely worked tag matches outside the occasional studio squash, I guess. So, it's going to take a bit of getting used to. I think I remember Beautiful Bobby gets a U.S. title match with Dusty, though, right? Obviously, Bobby doesn't win, but they were definitely experimenting with some different things here involving the Midnight Express. And again, I don't know if that was just creatively they didn't have anything for them to do or what the deal was, if they were just buying their time. But, well, that's kind of the gift of being a great in-ring worker. You can take a tag team like the Midnight Express and split them up for a little bit, have them do their own thing in singles action, and hey, it's still quality programming. Imagine that. But yeah, we still have a pretty heavy gap period between now and when they bring in the Fantastics for that U.S. title program. So then we have the best thing on the entire show. Cowboy Dusty Rhodes. The 2-time bunkhouse champion by Cracky. So you know what that means. Well, it's tradition after all. It's time for him to gear up to become a 3-time bunkhouse champion, daddy. But more importantly, to become the Bull of the Woods, if you know what I'm saying. Talks about the many struggles of what it means to be a bunkhouse stampede winner. The long days and long nights where you wake up in the morning, reaching to check to make sure your ears are still attached to your head, that your nose is still in place. And it's all about the competition of going through 25, 30 other men to prove you're the Bull of the Woods. And to let us know that Dusty is the Bull, he wraps up here by reaching down to pull out his inner Ric Flair, and instead of going, woo, he looks into the camera and goes, moo. All-time great Dusty segment. It's one thing to hear him moo into the camera with a straight face. When he's out there in that fucking cowboy outfit, dressed from head to toe in this old-fashioned Western gear, dude, I couldn't help it. I was laughing so hard watching this. And only Dusty could pull something like this off. It was so goddamn bizarre. It was almost so out of character for him, while at the same time, you watch him do a promo like this, you still believe everything he says. as ridiculous as everything was. Marvelous pre-tape. All-time great moment in 1987. So then we go back to the arena for a Ric Flair promo. And it took them basically until hour 2 of this week's program to let us know Ric Flair is defending the world title against Michael P.S. Hayes, of all people. Had I not read the caption for this week's program on the network feed, I would not have realized Flair was even defending the belt until this very segment. Because it was never mentioned at any point prior. Just throwing it out in the open. Hey, Flair's wrestling this week. And the belt is on the line. But yeah, that's kind of all there was to it. He claimed it is his first title defense on TV in 2 years. First one since reclaiming the gold at Starrcade against Ronnie. And tonight is where Flair proves that he is beyond a shadow of a doubt the man. I also loved here that even though Flair knew he had to defend the belt this week on TV, in approximately 40 minutes from this point, mind you, still comes out to do the promo in a 3-piece suit. Because he's the champ, goddammit. And he is indeed the man. And from there we go back to the ring for Tully and Arn versus Nelson Royal and the Italian Stallion. Nelson Royal, the current junior heavyweight champion. That was very briefly mentioned in passing last week. And it was never brought up at any other point on the show. It's also funny hearing him announce as the junior heavyweight champion when he's virtually the same size as everybody else in the match. All things considered, it was not a very remarkable horseman squash. Tully and Arn took turns beating up both guys. Royal got to work over Anderson very briefly before he tagged out the Stallion. And they kind of stayed on Stallion through the remainder of the match until AA won with the spine buster. Did not even break out the signature slingshot here. It was the quick one, so to speak. And then we come back at the top of the hour for a Tully and Arn promo, with Arn making sure to block David Crockett's entire body in the camera frame. So literally all we see is a mystery hand holding out the microphone for everybody to talk into. It's kind of your prototypical badass horseman promo. Tully and Arn are putting themselves over and talking about how they're among the most elite in the sport because they got the world tag belts to prove it. Arn's talking about how they built their reputation on being pro wrestlers and not movie stars or career actors. When they walk into the airport or when they walk into a shopping mall, they garner attention just because of who they are. And they don't miss shows for anything, whether it's the flu, car troubles, whatever the case may be. They always find a way to compete because that's what their group is rooted in, the symbol of excellence. And as I'm listening to them cut this promo, it took me until about 5 minutes afterwards to realize, oh, that's right. These guys are still supposed to be heels. Never would have thunk it. And judging how fucking awesome that promo was and the fact that there was nothing heelish about it. Like, even when they're trying to act brash and cocky on camera, you just think, well, yeah, but they back it up in the ring because they're so damn good at what they do, so even if you hate them, they're not wrong. How do you boo these guys? It's impossible. Then we had Nikita Koloff defending the TV title against Mark Starr in a not-so-competitive match. As I'm watching Nikita here, I can already see signs of the muscle mass tapering off in certain areas. It's really noticeable in the bicep area, and the upper thighs, too. He's looking oddly plain these days. He's also skipping out on the tanning bed. God, is that guy still a strong powerhouse. The buffed up Nikita stature, it's dwindling week by week. He's still rocking the bald look, though. But even that's going to wind up changing before not too long. You know, it's kind of sad. We're seeing the early stages of Nikita's downfall. And we've been doing these Crockett reviews for a couple years now. Go back to 86. December of 86, man. Nikita was on top of the world, putting over how great he was at the time and all the fantastic business he was doing with Flair and Dusty and Magnum. Man, 12 months. It's all the difference makes. And while not totally prevalent quite yet, by the time we get to mid to late 88, boy howdy, it's like a completely different person we're going to be dealing with. There really wasn't much to say about that match, though. Nor was there much to say about Kevin Sullivan versus Rick Ryder, which is kind of the norm when it comes to Kevin Sullivan matches. It was very short. Sullivan beat him up for a few minutes, connected with a couple running knee lifts while Ryder was in the Tree of Woe. And then after some mild paintbrushing, slaps, and chops to the face and chest, he ends up going over with the double foot stomp. I mean, they didn't really acknowledge the Rick Steiner stuff from last week. So, yeah, they're still leaving a lot of room for guessing with what's going on there. But keep this in mind, because this would not be Sullivan's last appearance on the show. Coming back, though, we had Lex Luger and JJ up for an interview. And I think I lied. Remember when I said that Dusty pre-tape was the best thing on the entire show? Turns out I may have fibbed. This was the best fucking thing on the entire show. By a country mile. Not even for anything Luger said here. Because to be honest, I kind of tuned him out. I got distracted by JJ's epic performance here. So, you know, Luger is doing the rah-rah horseman speech. He's saying they all performed well at Starrcade and showed why they're the most dominant group in all of wrestling, blah, blah. And of course, the thing we're all thinking as viewers at home, dude, you fucking lost. What are you so gleeful about? Well, as it turns out, JJ wasn't buying any of that hot garbage either. Because while Luger's trying to cut this, you know, respectful, semi-white meat babyface promo, there's JJ standing in the background, rubbing his forehead, rolling his eyes, totally blowing off this whole thing. Like, you could tell he's about had it with Luger's "I respect you" speeches. And then here's where things really take an interesting turn. As Luger starts talking about how it's time for him to branch out on his own and show why he's the future of pro wrestling. He'll be the man to carry the torch well into the 2000s, which was artful foreshadowing. I would not really say he carried things into the 2000s with him on top. I mean, he had kind of been phased out as a top guy by then, am I right? I mean, maybe for like a year, he was still a top guy in WCW, but I think it's pretty safe to say the Luger experiment had long since been killed by that point. I mean, we're watching WWF in the mid-90s, and they had already destroyed Luger's career. In any case, so, again, JJ overhears Luger talking about all this. He wants to do it on his own. And you can see him stop, and he looks up, and he just glares a hole through Luger. He's chewing on his eyeglass temples, totally baffled that this guy's trying to throw the Horseman under the bus and claim that he can do it on his own. And we're just slowly watching this guy slip through the cracks with each passing week. Because you know the Horsemen are watching on standby, hearing Luger try to be a big shot and branch out on his own. And we saw how quickly they were to turn on Ole. It's only a matter of time. before the rest of them say, fuck this dude. J.J. Dillon, man. Brilliant. He is the man that can say the most on this program by saying absolutely nothing. And that really is the charm with all of his stuff. You know, the Horsemen breakup in early 88 kind of stems from the rest of the group standing in the background making weird facials, giving Luger the side eye from off camera. Not a lot has been said verbally. They haven't teased any major dissension as a group yet. But visually, peripherally, you're kind of watching all this stuff break down at the seams. You know, they're not a cohesive unit like they once were about a year ago when Luger jumped on board and took Ole's spot. Remember how they were kind of hesitant to let him into the group at first, too? That was all part of the story, where Tully was like, I don't know, guys. This might not seem like a good plan. How does Luger really fit into the Horseman mold? And it took him a while. He wasn't welcome with open arms. There was always that hesitancy, and now we're starting to see, maybe Luger's getting too big for his britches. Even if Luger might not see it that way, and that's kind of the genius of the way this is all being constructed. You know, Luger's acting more like a babyface with each passing week, and the rest of the Horsemen are becoming more and more volatile, more and more collectivist. It's us versus them. You know, when Luger's finally starting to realize, hey, you know, I didn't beat Dusty at Starrcade, but I proved I could hang with him. Maybe I am capable of more. Maybe I am capable of doing things on my own for a change. Ain't that interesting plot development? It's almost like there's this thing called character evolution in wrestling. Organic character evolution. Go figure. Then we go back to the ring for Mama Cornette's favorite wrestler, Beautiful Bobby. Which I don't doubt for a second. It is his turn for singles action as he goes up against Rex King. And boy, I will tell you, it takes a lot of skill and effort to have a bad match with Bobby Eaton. I think Rex King may be the first and only. This is the moment I determined. Bobby Eaton, way too nice of a guy. He's letting Rex King shine early on. He's bumping for him, trying with every ounce of his being to feed for this fucking moron. Every single thing Rex tried in this match, he utterly failed at. He comes off the ropes at one point and just sort of runs into Bobby like a toddler would run into his dad trying to tackle him to the ground. Bobby doesn't even bother selling it. It looks so horrible. Finally, he just says, I'll take it from here, brother. At which point, Bobby attempted to pull out a passable match with Rex King, who, by the way, still did a horrible job selling for his offense. So we have now determined Rex King can no longer work offensively or defensively. In other words, a bad professional wrestler. You know, they had Bubba run some interference on the floor to try to generate some type of fan reaction for this match. Most of them were just kind of quietly sitting on their hands. Yeah, and finally Bobby cut off Rex at the end and hit him with a middle row belly-to-belly suplex. That is now 2 straight occasions on this one show where the job guys lucked out wrestling nice people. Just like I was talking about with that Sting match earlier. If Rex King would have been caught fucking up spots like that with a mean, rugged top guy on this show, anybody in the Horsemen, for example, that guy would have been toast. They'd have stretched him like a rubber band and left him for dead. Probably piss in his mouth while he was down there. No, instead, Bobby said, no problem, friend. Just let me take over and I'll guide you, and we'll be good. I wish I could have had a beer with Bobby Eaton. That way I could ask him the serious questions What was your thought process wrestling Rex King in the year 1987? That would be the extent of our entire conversation. Bobby, why didn't you kill him? So after that, we had a pretty interesting little segment, actually. I mean, on paper, I was about ready to pass out from boredom. And that was before the bell rang. The match is Mike Rotunda versus A Thunderfoot. What made it interesting was right before the bell sounded, we had week number 2 of Kevin Sullivan trying to recruit people. And again, as you recall last week, it was during a Rick Steiner match where Sullivan intervened and tried to slap some sense into Rick to fire him up and have him be more aggressive. And, same premise this week. Sullivan's talking about how Mike Rotunda should be way farther than he is in his career right now. What with him being the current Florida heavyweight champion. It used to be a stepping stone title in the 70s when a guy was preparing to challenge for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Sullivan doesn't see the passion or the fire in Rotunda. He just sees him coming out and wrestling bums every week. And it's so ironic because I'm listening to Kevin Sullivan talk about this stuff, and it sounded like he was playing the role of me. Because that's pretty much what I've been saying about Mike Rotunda matches on this show for Christ knows how long now. Like, if you think about it, he's not entirely off base. What has Mike Rotunda done in the NWA since the UWF merger? He came up from Florida. He's worked a couple squash matches, bored the brakes off of people, and then he cuts rambling babyface promos that nobody cares about or reacts to. And again, that is not a shot at Rotunda, but I mean, we can call it like it is. Dude's boring as shit as a bland vanilla babyface. The one thing you will never hear me advocate for is babyface Mike Rotunda. So sure enough, what happens? Well, out comes Sullivan to get in his face, tell him to be more aggressive, just like he did with Rick Steiner. And then the match became awesome. Rotunda starts laying into Thunderfoot, whipping him around the ring, beating the crap out of him. And finally, he ends up hitting him with an atomic drop, followed by the airplane spin FU combo for the 3 count. Imagine that. All it took was Mike Rotunda to work like a heel, and his matches instantly went from like a 2 to a 9. Now again, obviously planting the seeds for the beginning stages of the Varsity Club. It was funny how explicit Kevin was in describing just how insignificant Mike Rotunda actually was on this show up to this point. Because again, factually speaking, he's not wrong. But it was just weird to hear him actually address it publicly. Hey, this guy could actually be something if he turned heel with me and started actually wrestling people that people gave a shit about. Maybe some top baby faces. And far be it for me to disagree with the games master, but I think he may be onto something there. Mike Rotunda wrestling top baby faces? Now, sounds a lot more intriguing than him wrestling the Thunderfoots. But from there, we arrive at our TV main event for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Ric Flair defends against Michael Hayes. His first title defense on television in 2 years. And so now I'm trying to think offhand. Who was his last opponent that he would have defended the title against on TV? It was Ricky Morton, wasn't it? Wasn't that like late 85? Right at the tail end of the year? I should probably look that up just to confirm, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Ricky. Now, of course, there's no love lost between these two. You know, these guys have had a handful of big matches in Texas from several years prior. Obviously, in that scenario, though, the roles were reversed. Hayes was very much the heel in that situation. And I'll tell you what, man. Sucks that I missed the bulk of that opener with Barry Windham and Larry Zbyszko. But if I had to sacrifice one to see the other, I probably would have done the same if it meant we were going to get to see Hayes and Flair. This is like the best match I've ever seen Michael Hayes have in any promotion. And I don't know if you credit that to Ric Flair for being a genius in-ring worker, or if he and Flair just had natural chemistry together. It's not to say this came anywhere close to being the best match of Flair's career, but it really goes to show, man, when you're Ric Flair and you're in there with a guy that was never known for being the best in-ring technician, yeah, you can still be carried to a pretty watchable match. And there's virtually every Ric Flair match in the book. There wasn't really anything unique about it. But him feeding for Hayes while they're letting Hayes run wild and fire up the crowd. Boy, does that shit work, man. Especially with a guy as charismatic as Michael Hayes was. You know, and they had a very simple story. Hayes hit Flair with everything he had. For whatever reason, though, Flair just had everything scouted from a positioning standpoint. If Hayes tried to hit a big move, you know, Flair was sure to be near the ropes so he could get his foot underneath and break up the counts. You know, anytime it sounded like Hayes was on the brink of victory, something would happen to where Flair would get his shoulder up in time. You know, and they're really milking the big moments here, even until the very end when they gave us that big photo fuck you kind of finish, as Hayes goes to roll up Flair in a sunset pin, and right as the official is coming down to count the pinfall, 1, 2, and they cut away. Right after the 2 count. Now, technically, we did see Flair's shoulders pop off the mat before 3, so the smart fan would say, yeah, he kicked out. That was pretty clear. But they had the people there at the end. You know, Flair was using all his regular cheating tactics behind the official's back, and at the point Hayes started firing back, the people were into all the near falls. Of course, the best one of them all, right as Hayes goes to hit the sunset, with no remaining TV time, they fade to black before we get the actual result. They did us dirty is what they did. Yeah, I'm sure that got over well with all the people watching at home. Oh, wait a minute. No, it didn't. That's right. Yeah, this form of dick teasing the fans with a finish and not actually delivering. Yeah. This would not be the first time we would see it. And it never went over well. I think I read somewhere, didn't the company get a bunch of hate mail from fans spelling their outrage over getting fucked around like that? Because like these kinds of finishes would happen pretty frequently from what I remember. And I think they had to put a stop to it because people kept getting pissed off. I mean, in many ways, I don't necessarily hate the idea of doing something like this on occasion. Again, I think the problem was they ended up overdoing it to the point where people just kind of got fed up with it. You know, it's like the Dusty finish where after people see it over and over again, it kind of starts to generate the wrong kind of reaction. You know, where it's not the fans booing because they didn't get to see a finish. It's the people booing the company for getting stiffed around. Not that anybody expected Hayes to actually win the title here, but, you know, even just, you know, ringing the bell to signal the end of the show, that would have been better than this. Cutting it off so abruptly like that. You know, all it does is take the air out of the room for the people watching on TV. Now, the fans in the arena that see it live, well, that's a different matter entirely because they actually get to see the full thing. But for the viewers at home, it's not the same effect. You know, lame finish aside, the Flair-Hayes match was good for what we saw. Outstanding, I'd even go as far as to say. And, you know, while the rest of the show was mostly story-driven stuff to push forward the Horseman agenda and some of the Varsity Club business, we got some other enjoyable stuff on the program. JJ was great this week. Tully and Arn are always great. Luger was Luger. Sting's coming into his own, too. Yeah, a lot of good stuff being spread out during this 90-minute program this week. I think they even had a bit of an overrun, too. And again, I always like when they get out of Atlanta for these special shows, giving the people some higher caliber matches. It doesn't have to be some all-time spectacular card or anything, but, even advertising the people with a Ric Flair title match, and that'll definitely give you a TV ratings boost. And it makes the show feel different than your typical studio taping on syndicated television. And that definitely counts for something. So this was a nice little start to Mid-South this week. Detouring from the strict wrestling talk for a minute. They showed a pre-tape of Bill Watts and Reeser Bowden meeting with two representatives, one of whom I believe was the president to the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport. And, they're basically meaning to present a company check for one of the local organizations, one that specializes in assisting for underprivileged children. Cool little publicity move. They mentioned that the proceeds would go to the sports club for boys. I think the check was written out for $1,000. Again, didn't really have anything to do with the wrestling side of things, but, these kinds of segments are always cool. It's like when WWE does the Susan G. Komen sponsor plugs or any type of organization they're affiliated with, Connor's Cure, whatever it may be. Not really something you see prioritized much in today's wrestling climate, and that's kind of unfortunate, actually. I always remember this stuff being a much bigger deal when I was a kid, especially looking back at the territory days, the local charity plugs. I think the problem today is that so many organizations look at the state of wrestling and probably wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So, in many ways, I don't blame them. I always have to remind myself, this was back when wrestling wasn't a laughingstock amongst normal, everyday people. But that led into the first match on the card, as I wrote down here. Marty Lundy's pedo stash versus Stagger Lee. Yeah, he still has that. Pretty simple squash. Only went about a minute. Stagger Lee went over with the Thumper Power Slam, which I guess we're technically not supposed to call the Thumper because that's too much insider baseball. We're still not supposed to know the mystery identity. I will note, though, Stagger Lee really had to muscle up Double A to get him in that power slam position. Arn was not going up easy for him, and JYD was a very strong guy. So, that one was pretty in and out. As was Kamala versus King Cobra. They are acknowledging now Kamala is officially with General Skandar Akbar, along with Friday. That was the big story breakthrough from the previous week, where Akbar had revealed that he acquired Kamala's services, and he's also on a rampage to not only destroy his opponents, but he's also aiming to rip off the masks of every masked individual in the Mid-South territory. And now, according to Bob Roop's theorizing, the rumor going around is that Ted DiBiase is in cahoots with the General and Kamala to have them go after Stagger Lee and try to remove his mask. Which, if you think about it, makes perfect sense, right? Because the Rat Pack have less than 2 months now to prove that Stagger Lee is JYD. Because if they can't prove that Dog is under the hood, then once JYD's suspension is up, they can't do anything about it. So it's all great layered story development. And of course, it's Bob Roop sharing the story, so because he's traditionally been a heel on TV, you think to yourself when he's talking about this stuff, he's got to be lying, right? Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. It's all wait and see. on the subject of story progression that we're seeing develop, we also have Mr. Wrestling 2, where someone's going around defaming his masks and leaving him cryptic notes. And with each passing week, Wrestling 2 is getting more and more aggravated. He wants the mystery man to identify himself. So here in one of those only in the South type promos, Wrestling 2 goes over to Reeser Bowden and explains that he received a new threatening note and a mask with a yellow streak running down the back. So, deadpan, Wrestling 2 looks into the camera and says, "Whoever you are, come out of the closet and fight me like a man." And what makes it even better is the moment Wrestling 2 brings up the closet line, Reeser Bowden, for the first and maybe only time in his life showing authentic, genuine emotion on camera, looks directly into the camera and his eyes grow about 10 sizes bigger. Probably thinking to himself, "Ah, shit. Got a lawsuit waiting to happen now." But this is all great. Everything they're doing to develop the Mr. Wrestling 2 character right now. He's cutting some fiery babyface promos, and every week he's just showing more anger and more pent-up frustration over the issue. And it's making his matches even more aggressive. He wrestled Yoshiatsu this week, which basically went 2 minutes to a DQ after Kamala interfered. It was all pretty much Wrestling 2 in control. And right as Kamala hit the ring and started ganging up on 2, he immediately goes for the mask. And of course that kick-started all the afterbirth where you get Stagger Lee and Mr. Olympia running down to help out Wrestling 2. And there was a lot of stuff to keep track of here during the street fight. But I can tell you, it ended with the 3 masked babyfaces standing their ground while Kamala powdered. I have no idea where Yatsu went, but, he was just kind of a placeholder guy anyway. I did also note Kamala picking up Friday over his shoulder and carrying him to the back. I have no clue what happened, but he was sort of dead. I assume one of the babyfaces got to him on the floor. But it was a cool visual, seeing all the masked babyfaces uniting here and fending off the big monster heel. Bob Roop did sort of let the cat out of the bag when he called Stagger Lee using the thumper on Kamala. He kept going back and forth between Stagger Lee and Junkyard Dog to the point where you could totally tell he was trying to backtrack and failing miserably. But I suspect most people would not have picked up on that. This is good, though. Fun segment. It's more about the post-match than the actual Wrestling 2 match. But even the pre-match promo helped to move the story along. Now we're being led to believe this whole thing is being steered by the General Akbar. Now that Kamala's going after the masks, the obvious idea being planted into our heads is Kamala's the guy that Wrestling 2's calling out. Kamala has to be the mystery attacker. Right? No. Stay posted. Then we had Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne versus Mr. Olympia and Mike Sharp. Or Iron Mike Sharp, to go with his Christian name. And I'll just come out and say here, this match was absolutely phenomenal. This had what had to have been one of my favorite things I've ever seen in a wrestling match. As DiBiase goes to whip Mr. Olympia off the ropes, and he goes to set him up to catch him in a fallaway slam position. And of course, we've seen the spot in wrestling where the babyface uses his body weight to fly back and basically catch the heel with a crossbody. You have to see this spot in real time to understand just how fantastic it was. When Olympia goes up so DiBiase can catch him, Olympia begins to flail not just his legs around, but he also begins to flail his arms. And he looked like a human octopus with all the body limbs moving around here. I rewound it like 6 times, laughing harder with each passing watch. The greatest thing about it, too, is like we were 15 seconds into the match when everything was going at 100 miles an hour, and then Olympia just comes barreling into DiBiase like a fucking lawn dart. Now, of course, with all four guys involved, I expected nothing short of great, even though it was non-title, so there really wasn't much at stake here. And again, there was all this action happening in rapid-fire succession, crowds going nuts for everything. Eventually the heels are able to cut off the baby faces and slow the pace down. Gave them a chance to work over, I think it was Mike Sharp for the heat. And they milked the hot tag for Olympia. Pretty classic heat finish. Double bonk spot with DiBiase and Olympia in the corner. And Bourne was able to lure Alfred Neely over to his corner so Sharp could get into the ring illegally. And while Neely was holding Sharp back, Matt Bourne used that as the moment to go up top and hit the Bombs Away ass splash, as I've been calling it in my notes. I could call it the whoopee cushion, but might be too soon for that. We still have a couple more years of skid mark doink on Retro Raw, so I don't want to make a bad joke. But of course, that allowed the heels to steal the win. Again, great action. I love the DiBiase-Bourne pairing. And you can see, too, they're slow burn building something with Mr. Olympia, even though they're being very subtle with the way they're going about it. Iron Mike Sharp is kind of just being used as placeholder material right now. I don't think he sticks around in the Mid-South area much longer going into 83. He might be around for a little bit longer, but I think he's pretty much out of there by the end of the year. Then coming back from break, we went to some pre-tape footage at the Sam Houston Coliseum in Houston. Kind of goes without saying. I don't know why I needed to use the word Houston twice. The match is Chavo Guerrero versus a very young Bobby Jaggers, who we have talked about on some of those latter Crockett TV reviews in I think it was 86, right, when he was teaming with Dirty Dutch. Pretty short-lived run, though, because Bobby was pretty much in and out of the company in less than 3 months. But here he is a few years prior, working some prelim matches with Chavo. And, obviously Chavo's the guy that's been pushing considerably on TV lately, so it's kind of a showcase piece for him. The idea is that he brings in a different style and a flavor to the Mid-South region, and the fans weren't really accustomed to seeing a lot of that at the time, so he caught on pretty quickly. And, the match was all right for what it was. However, there were two issues here. One, Paul Bosch was dubbed over doing commentary. The amount of times I had to hear him talk about Bobby Jaggers jerking Chavo Guerrero in this match, it's enough to make your head spin. The other problem is that half the match was Jaggers holding Chavo down in a stationary headlock while Paul Bosch was lulling people into a coma with his boring commentary. So it was both dry and nauseating. But the finish was great. Chavo breaking out the Hurricane Rana. And again, a move you didn't see all that frequently. And it's not that stupid-ass version of the Rana spot we see everybody do today where they do the reverse version and then drop the guy on the back of his fucking head. And then the guy just no-sells it and pops back up 2 seconds later. The Poison Rana. Poisonous to my overall mental stability. But, again, fine for what it was. It's hard to really comment on any story development with Chavo and Mid-South around this time because, again, I don't remember him sticking around much longer. He popped back up with Hector Guerrero a couple years later when they were working together as a heel team. I think they were down in Florida for a period too, but the solo babyface push of Chavo Sr. and Mid-South, I don't remember that really going anywhere. And by 83, as we might remember from World Class reviews last year, he was doing some work down in Dallas for a while before he went back to Mid-South. So again, I think he's gone pretty quickly. Now, of course, offhand, I'm not going to be able to recall any of the feuds he did because My brain's not working at the moment. I know I'll think of something when I'm editing the show, but that would require me to remember all the tag teams that were wrestling in Mid-South from like 83 to 85. And aside from the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express, I got nothing. If you already can't tell, I'm trying to prolong the conversation as much as we can so I don't have to talk about Princess Victoria versus Leonie Kai. God bless Moolah, dude. Yeah, I know she trained a lot of these young gals that were coming up through the system back around this time. The business has come a long way since. You know, as much as I have my issues with the way modern wrestling is presented today with the women, I mean, I can already name like 5 girls offhand that are far and away better athletes than Princess Victoria and Leonie Kai. Hint, none of them work for AEW. Of course, here I just had to roll my eyes. Like Bob Roop's on commentary talking about equal rights and all that crap. I'm like, oh God, seriously? We were doing this feminist equality for all bullshit back in 1982? That was a rhetorical question, by the way. I know all that stuff predates back like 20 years before that. It was still annoying hearing it get rammed down my throat here. The match was not all that good. Victoria got blown up like 2 minutes in. For the record, the match went about 4. Crowd got deader and deader with each passing minute. I honestly can't even remember who won the fucking match. I think I forgot to write it down. Somebody won with a crossbody attack. It's a girls' match. It has no story significance on the program. I'll just move on. Call me sexist if you want. I don't give a fuck. Because you know who else didn't give a fuck here was the crowd. But that left us with a few minutes of TV time left. Another non-sanctioned bout. Hacksaw Duggan, Louisiana State's heavyweight champion, versus Mike Bond. Which, Duggan won pretty concisely with a spear. I did get a kick out of Boyd having to yet again remind us that Duggan is spelled with 2 G's. Which does make me think, after the first time hearing Bill Watts explain virtually the same thing on TV, if it was spelled with 1 G, how would you pronounce it? Dugan? Dugon? See, these are the vital questions, folks. This is why we do these classic reviews. To ask the hard-hitting questions that nobody else thinks of. Or in the case of Duggan, hard-hitting moves that give guys direct concussions. Now, this is more or less about the aftermath, where Duggan went over to the commentary booth for some unscheduled promo time. He informed us that Tony Atlas is a coward for no-showing today's episode. Even though I'm pretty sure in story he just wasn't booked for the card. But Duggan's a heel, so it's the perfect line. Calling Mr. USA a coward for no-showing a show that he wasn't even booked for, knowing he wasn't there anyway. So he calls out Atlas for next week and tells him if he's got the guts, he'll meet him in the ring face-to-face for a fight. And, Roop and Pierce didn't exactly co-sign it, but I'm sure Atlas will have a thing or two to say about Duggan's challenge. Pretty simple way to go out this week. You know, as I always say, you can never substitute for Bill Watts on commentary. Roop was an okay play-by-play guy, but, you just can't replace greatness. Well, in all fairness, Jim Ross is pretty good too. But, this is one of those episodes where not a whole lot was going on, outside a couple minor plot developments. You know, outside that really great tag match with the Rat Pack, Olympia, and Sharp. Really nothing you need to hunt down on this week. the stuff they're doing with Wrestling 2 is coming along well. Kamala and Skandar Akbar is part of Devastation Inc. and how they're tying and layering all these other moving parts in the story together. So, it's all a work in progress. Mid-South really hasn't hit its peak yet, as they would over the next couple years once the star power started to really broaden and expand. But you see growth. And that's really why these retrospectives are fun. Going back and seeing where things started to where they eventually took off over time once the various territories found their footing. Obviously every company went through ebbs and flows, but yeah, definitely for Mid-South, especially over the next couple years, going into 83, 84, a little bit of 85. Yeah, that growth was very much exponential. Well, second week in a row, we got the classic TV mature audiences warning from our friends on the Cock. They apparently wanted to forewarn us about the impending blood and guts this week on world-class programming. I was kind of wondering to myself when I saw that message, Jesus Christ, after last week's Texas death, what could be worse? Someone going to get open heart surgery in the middle of the ring? No. I don't know if I can call this week gruesome in comparison to the previous episode, but Bill Mercer did let us know that it was going to be a banger. Guess he was listening to his old Sheamus tapes. Now, in all likelihood, I'm thinking the warning message was a result of them actually airing a replay of the Texas death fallout. They captured just enough footage there to basically show the ring the blood all over the ring mat. So I'm assuming they just kept it up there as a precautionary measure. By the way, if you want to hear me recap that match, go check out last week's episode. It is well worth the listen, and I had a lot to say about it, and I'm not going to repeat it here. What I will talk about, though, is the American Tag Title match that opened the card this week. By the way, this is week 2 of the Thanksgiving Star Wars special. Admittedly, I kind of forgot who the tag team champions were in the Dallas region at this point. Turns out it was the Fantastics. Yeah. No idea how the hell they won those belts. I'm going to have to go look that up later for my own reference. God, it's been so long since the tag belts have been defended on TV, much less seen in person. But this one is the Fantastics going up against the PYTs. Collection of 4 great talent there. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same for the match. Nothing against the 4 guys involved, but, in retrospect, as I look back, I just didn't think it was a very good match. Lots of miscues and botched spots here, which seemed very out of place for a Fantastics PYT match. I'm not exactly sure how many times these guys got to work with each other over the years. Maybe the chemistry was just off here. It all started when Norvell Austin came down out of the corner with a moonsault and landed right on top of Bobby Fulton's head. From that moment, it was all downhill. There was a double leapfrog spot at one point where all 4 guys were completely on separate pages and totally forgot what they were supposed to do. Bobby Fulton does the duck under, so one of the PYTs can leapfrog over him and land on his feet. That part looked fine. But then Tommy Rogers tried to do the exact same spot. I think it was with Norvell, too. Norvell completely undershot the leapfrog and basically tripped over Rogers. It did not look good. Norvell was not having a good night this week. Now, it did pick up later on when the PYTs got their bearings straight and started working over Rogers for the heat. They actually let the match run a while, too, so they had plenty of time to let things breathe. They actually did the reverse psychology bit at one point where the Fantastics did fake tags behind Rick Hazard's back while they were working with the heels. Crowd kind of dug that. Little taste of their own medicine, shoving it right back in the heel's face. Like I said, they finally got to work over Rogers for a while until Fulton got the hot tag and made the comeback. And they actually had a cool finishing sequence here as Bobby locks on the abdominal stretch to Norvell. Coco Ware comes off the top to try to give Bobby the axe handle, but Bobby sees it coming, so he actually adjusts himself mid-positioning so he can put Norvell into the line of fire. So it's another miscommunication spot for the heels. And that allowed for Bobby Fulton to grab Coco and cradle him for the 3 count. Yes, he did indeed pin the wrong man. And you know what the crowd did? They cheered. Did not matter how good or bad the match was. All these Dallas fans wanted to see was some good guys going over. And by golly, they got it. Even if the match was kind of a stinker. No, again, I like both teams. I've seen them have a million matches better than this one. Oh. I mean, in the case of Norvell and Coco, I probably only realistically seen maybe a dozen or so of their matches. The Fantastics is a different story because their time span was a little bit longer. Yeah, when we review those matches with the Midnights from the 88 period, yeah, that's going to be peak Fantastics at the top of their game. Can't wait for those series of matches. This one, well, I'll just say this. The Pretty Young Things were not the Midnight Express. Athletically, as skilled in-ring proficient workers, not quite on the same level as Bobby and Stan. Or Bobby and Dennis. Or Dennis and Randy. Or Dennis, Randy, and Norvell. Or, you get the point. And yet, even as I reflect back on that not-so-great opening tag match, it was still only about 1,000 times better than Chic Donovan versus General Skandar Akbar. Dude. What the fuck happened here? How long was Chic Donovan out of action dealing with that leg injury? It was something like 4 or 5 months, right? It was not an incredible length of time. He came back to wrestle this week after all that time off. He looked like he was in week 1 training in wrestling school. Every single thing he did here with Akbar, it was the phoniest, fakest looking shit I've ever seen anybody perform in a ring. And it's important to keep in mind here, too. There's a backstory to this. Way back in the midsummer, when they shot the angle on TV where Killer Khan attacked the left knee of Chic Donovan and put him on the shelf, so to speak. In reality, they were writing him out of action so he could go get knee surgery. So he comes back here, and he wrestles Akbar in this grudge match of sorts. I can't even explain what the hell he was trying to do for like 90% of this thing. You have to see it to get the full picture. It looked like a one-legged cripple trying to have a pillow fight with an elderly guy. Just not laying into anything they do. For like most of Chic's offense, he just sort of kept trying to pick Akbar's leg and very weakly worked that over. Of course, most of the time, Akbar's not even cooperating with him to take bumps. The guy's fucking barely mobile as it is. You know, I always love that when the general gets his ass kicked in some big extended angle, and then right as soon as it's time for the heels to run interference or something, or they have to set up a different spot in the transition, he'll just get right back up. And he'll start no-selling like nothing ever happened. It's one of my pet peeves of watching General Akbar's material back in the day. But of course, the capper here, after this long, interminable, hideous 8-minute match that was just mind-numbing beyond belief, what is the finish? Killer Khan runs in for the DQ. I wrote in big bold letters, "Fuck you." And then when Terry Gordy ran out to send the heels packing, I wrote down, "Never mind." Gordy earned them back a half star. This was a -4-star match with a 2-quarter-star ending, simply because of Gordy's involvement. Beyond that, had to be the worst payoff to a grudge match in the history of World Class. Not that I was ever holding out hope for Chic Donovan. You know, that endorsement Kevin gave him months back before they wrote him off. No. Kevin was a bright man. That was not one of his finer moments. Trying to endorse Chic Donovan. But, well, before we get to our TV main event, speaking of Kevin, he gave us a little bit of insight before his match with Chris Adams, vowing that tonight he lives up to his promise. At the Cotton Bowl, Chris Adams made Kevin leave in an ambulance after cracking him in with the head with a chair. So tonight he makes sure Chris leaves under the same conditions. Meanwhile, Chris is talking about the fact that he does not respond well to idle threats. And while he is not making any outright claims, he does say that tonight's match could end the same way as the Cotton Bowl did, with Kevin leaving in an ambulance and being carted off to a local medical facility. No, he didn't actually use that term. I just kind of figured that would trigger people. Oh, and I had to mention this too, because this is awesome. The best sign I've ever seen in World Class, it reads, "Chris Adams, you think you're cool, but you're really a fool." Got him. I wish I could do my drop snap gimmick in front of the camera so you could all see what I'm doing. But yeah, that was a pretty amazing sign right there. You think you're cool, but you're really a fool. Not even a tool. No, a fool. Would have been better if they said something like, "Kevin's cool, Chris drools," or something childish like that. I don't fucking know. But why don't we talk about the big showdown, the second grudge match on this week's program, Kevin Von Erich versus Chris Adams. Oh, hold on, I forgot to mention this too. During that pre-tape, Gary Hart was rubbing Chris Adams' shoulders and giving him a quote-unquote massage. I am not going to insinuate anything here, because I'm not that kind of guy. Gary looked like he was really enjoying that shoulder rub. Just throwing it out there, you know. So, well, it basically went as you would expect. Jump start before the opening bell. The ring was practically cluttered with trash as these guys are trying to grapple with each other. And it's a pretty steady back and forth brawl for several minutes. During their little scuffle around the timekeeper's table, one of them tugged on a cord too much and then fucked up the audio. A lot of malfunctioning going on with Mercer's headset. And, I mean, it was annoying. They did fix it, but it was a very unpleasant sound, hearing all that static feed blasting into my ears. And right at the end, as Kevin tries to monkey flip Chris out of the corner, Gary Hart picks Kevin's ankle and trips him up. And then Chris is able to come off the middle rope with a splash, and he gets the pin using Kevin's trunks. Now, of course, you look at that on paper and think, the fuck? They had Chris beat Kevin in 4 minutes flat? What kind of revenge angle is that? Well, never fear, because this is world class after all. You had to figure Chris was going to go out in a body bag in some form or manner. I wouldn't say it was that extreme, but Kevin did get a bit of revenge here on Chris. As he goes out to grab a chair from the timekeeper's table, he grabs the house mic and says that he made a promise, damn it, and he's going to live up to it. So he goes in there and starts waving his chair around like a madman. Poor David Manning's literally trying to step in and be the voice of reason, but all Kevin sees is red. So he eventually is able to clock Gary Hart and Chris with a chair, opens up Chris's forehead with a wicked shot to the skull. You know, Chris does the blade job, and Kevin's being held back by the officials. But he's still pissed, because Gary ended up pulling out Chris from under the bottom rope. So, technically speaking, Chris left under his own power, and Kevin was not satisfied. People obviously popped huge for the chair shot, though. They cheered Kevin at the end, even though he lost the fall. Didn't really seem to bother them, though, because they got to see Chris bleed. And that really was kind of the payoff. They just wanted to see Chris Adams get busted open with a chair. Now, again, looking back at this was only chapter development. This beef is far from over, trust me. But for where they did the angle, it was all well done. And again, the match didn't need to go that long. It was very secondary in comparison to the actual angle with the chair. So, again, a very simple in and out kind of deal, but it worked for the crowd. Kind of sucks that we had to wait until the last 5 minutes to actually get something good this week, but it's just kind of how things went down, unfortunately. The tag match with the Fantastics and the PYTs was kind of disappointing, in the sense that he had two great teams in there, but the match just wasn't all that good. That Chic Donovan Skandar Akbar match, the less we have to speak about that, the better. Again, I have no idea what happened there, but that was just awful beyond all comprehension. But they managed to turn it around at the end with that Chris Kevin main event. And, at the end of the day, you were kind of just waiting for about 4 minutes to see Kevin bust the guy open with a chair, but at least the people got to see that. So it was a good way to go out. And I think for next week's show, they promised us the Stella Mae Lady Giant pairing. Yeah. We'll see if that turns out any better than Chic Donovan versus the General. Well, now I've kind of set the bar higher, so don't let me down, girls. Have a better match than Chic Donovan did. Shouldn't be that hard. All right. So I'm going to get this baby uploaded and edited, so I'm not going to spend too long here with the outros. Again, keeping you all in mind for the Monday show. If I don't do a SmackDown report, my apologies. I might not get a chance to get around to it. As of this morning, I have already started watching Retro Raw, and I'm going to try to fit in NXT here before I go to bed tonight. So that'll probably be my window of availability for the next couple days. So we'll see how things go. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you on Monday. Take care. Peace out.